Mr. Berg is a water systems engineer, has been for 30 years, working mostly with Oregon utilities, but also the past 15 years with going out into developing nations and helping. He just got back from the country that is closest to St. Kitts and Nevis. What is that name of that country in the Caribbean? Anybody? Trivia?
States.
No. It is Antigua and Barbuda. And he just got back. You want to come up, Mr. Berg? He is currently with CH2M and has been for how many years? 30 years, wow. And he will take over for at least 15 minutes here, I hope, and give us some ideas about what we can do in our homes and neighborhoods with treating water.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, and glad to be here. I'm always amazed at Corvallis and all these great volunteers like James, who puts countless hours into this kind of thing, and others with the City Club, so thank you. Tom's sad. Do you mind if I stand? Does that interrupt anything? Okay, I'll do that. Well, what we had been thinking up until recently was that if we had a big earthquake, we need to be prepared for days and weeks. And so people thought, I'll have some bottled water in my basement. That's pretty good. That'll get me through a few days. But now, what we realize, and this was highlighted in the Oregon Resilience Plan 2013, is that we're not talking days and weeks. We're talking weeks and months when we think about a big Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. So none of you have a big enough basement to store weeks and months and a year's worth of water. So that's a problem. We have to change our thinking. Now, when it comes to drinking water, it's a little tricky. And you thought I was going to bring this up here to drink, but it's just to look at. And is that water in that glass safe to drink?
Where did you get it?
Who knows? We don't know. That's the problem. You can't look at water and tell if it's safe to drink or not. So the primary health concern we have if we have a big earthquake is with pathogens. So we have some, legitimate concerns about chemical contamination. We might get industrial accidents. Some of that might go on, but what we're primarily focused on is disease-causing microbes that we get in the drinking water for an acute health impact. So that's what our focus is. And the challenge is, and goes back to the glass of water, is you can't see pathogens, which is a really good thing. If you could, you'd be completely freaked out. But you can't see them. So I brought up with me something just to help illustrate this issue. And I really do have it here. James, you can be my...
Do I get bitten?
You can be my witness. Oh no, I dropped it. It really doesn't matter because you couldn't have seen it anyway, but I thought, just to be honest, I would bring one. It was a human hair. Okay, so if you pluck a hair off your head, depending on what color your hair is, what your ethnic background is, it might be anywhere from 60 to 120 microns in diameter. So pretend I'm holding that here. You can't see it anyway. So just in round numbers, if you think of the diameter of a human hair and divide it by 10, now you're in the size range of protozoa, like you've heard of giardiasis if you go hiking, cryptosporidium. So you're in that range. Now divided by 10 again and you're in the bacteria range. And now divided by 10 again and you're in the virus range. So that's the problem. They're way too small to see. So you can't look at that glass of water and see if it's safe to drink or not. Now, looks like a pretty active crowd. How many of you have gone hiking before and used a backpacking filter? How did you know that the filter was working?
We live.
Except for all the people that aren't here tonight with us. You have a backpacking filter, and there's no way to know when you look at the product that it's working, right? What you're doing is trusting that the company that makes it and the information they provide you, that you can rely on that. And that's the only way you know if a backpacking filter works or not. So what that takes us down is the path of certification. So what we want, if we're thinking about methods to treat water at your house, household water treatment after a disaster, which you need because you can't store up enough water. So, I mean, just backing up for a moment, we heard the city's doing a lot of things, but they're not going to be able to do everything. And so we're thinking that, okay, the city does things that they can do, and individually we do things that we can do. And what that means is probably you want to have some household water treatment. And maybe not everyone has to have that. I figure I'm sort of that water treatment person for our neighborhood, right? James would definitely be the one for his neighborhood. I think he's the only one in the city that's got as many different things in his arsenal as I do. But the direction that takes us is certification. So we want to select products or methods that have been evaluated and certified that they're effective. Up until recently, really the only group that was doing that was NSF. It used to be National Sanitation Foundation. Now they just go by NSF. So you will pick up some products and they say that they've been NSF certified or maybe tested to NSF standards. So that's pretty good. I think more and more we're going to rely on what's being done at the World Health Organization. And they've got a program that's called the Household Water Treatment Evaluation Scheme. And the reason for that is that, why that's the World Health Organization, is that if you think about people around the world, many people rely every day on household water treatment. We don't in the United States. I mean, how many people drank water straight from your tap this morning? Okay, so if not everyone, nearly everyone, and I did too. And if you went to another place in the world, like the Middle East or Africa or most of Asia, Latin America, and you asked that question, no one would raise their hand, even if they're on city water. They'd say, you can't drink the water coming out of the tap. It's not safe to drink. And that's right. They can't count on it. So more than half the people in the world every day rely on household water treatment so that they have safe drinking water. We don't. They do. In fact, I think one evidence of this is if you look when you're at Winco sometime, notice who's stocking up on bottled water. Just not stocking up to have it for an emergency, but just to use for their day-to-day water intake. And international students are buying it because they figure that's what you have to do. You can't drink water from the tap. So I look around and I'm always seeing international students buying lots of bottled water. it's what they're used to. Well, anyway, so that's why the World Health Organization has gotten into this, and it's kind of a relatively new program. I think in the coming years, it's going to be what we look to before you buy a product. You look at this World Health Organization's website and you find which products have been tested and certified. And we put this sample of it on the table. You can find it on the website information that James provided. So the idea is that they're looking at products and they're challenging those products with 10 to the 6th, 10 to the 8th microorganisms, throwing lots of bacteria at them, and then looking at what kind of removal, throwing lots of viruses, throwing lots of protozoa at those, and seeing how well they work when they are treating a poor quality water, for example. And then based on that, they say, okay, this is a reliable treatment product. So we'll look at that when we talk about some products here in a moment. Sure. Okay. Thanks. James said, get out of here or you're in big trouble. Well, not actually. He didn't. So if we have a big earthquake, or when we have a big earthquake, depending on how you want to say it, there's a couple scenarios we might be looking at. One is that we have enough damage that the system is compromised, the water system, the city's water system, but they can get water to many parts of the city. And then what the city says is, it's not safe to drink, though. You need to boil the water coming out of the tap before you drink it. Well, of course, that's problematic if you don't have electricity and you don't have gas. So we want to look at some methods that you could use to treat water in a case like that. The other scenario might be that, at least for a period of time, the city can't get water to most parts of the system because pipes are broken in the ground, because pumping systems are down, because the plants are disabled. And in a case like that, you may have to go to a nearby source on your own, like the river, Mary's River, Willamette River, and collect water and treat it without any kind of pre-treatment. So now it could be pretty crummy water. So there are also products that are available that you could use in a case like that. And I guess we mostly want to talk about the products in a minute, but I did want to say one thing before we even get into the products, that probably the most important thing you could do from a household perspective is to have a jerry can, like that blue one up there. So you want something that you can use to collect water. Now, I think the city is, or some cities at least, are stockpiling those, but it's hard to have, 20,000 jerry cans sitting around. So it's a great thing to have in your own house, something that could be sealed up. You could carry water and you could treat water in it, or a couple. One maybe that you're collecting dirty water from the creek, and then another one that you use for your treated water. So let me just say that, and with that, we'll talk about the products more in a minute, but I'd be glad to take questions.
You want to mention your idea about chlorine 111? That's something that folks.
Sure. Okay.
This might be worth writing.
It's a pretty nice plug. I'm going to step down to show this. Okay, I said that the jerry can, I think, would be about number one on my list, but this would be number two. You really should get some bleach. Just keep the container sealed. And did I? How about now?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. You should get some bleach and put it in your earthquake kit. This is the best thing you can do. This will treat a lot of drinking water. Okay, you need bleach And this came up earlier in one of the questions, is after an earthquake, you can't go to the store and get things. You know, the roads are broken, the stores are disabled, you know, all that, they've fallen down on top of each other, and you don't even know where to go to get it. But you want bleach and you want an eyedropper. And the reason why is because, and there's different ways of saying this, and some of the information from OSU had this same kind of thing, but a simpler way to do it, so you don't have to have this on paper. All you have to do is remember 1 for 1 for 1. Okay, 1 drop of chlorine in 1 gallon of water for 1 hour. And if you do that, you've gone a long way toward getting safe drinking water. Now, if you're taking it from a river and it's really dirty, that's kind of marginally effective. You know, I'd like to filter it through, use your clean T-shirt or something like that before you pour it in your container and double the dose. But say the city is telling you, okay, we can get water to you, but it's not safe. You've got to boil it. Well, instead of boiling it, you could do this 1 for 1 for 1. 1 drop of bleach in 1 gallon of water and leave it sit for 1 hour.
Do you put the cap on when you leave it sit or leave it open?
Well, yeah, it's always great to put the cap on, sure. Yeah, just to protect it so things don't fall in it.
What is the shelf life of Clorox?
Well, if it's sealed up, it's really a pretty long time. Now, what happens over time is that the strength drops.
Okay.
So if you buy bleach in the store, and what you like to do is get unscented bleach, which is actually harder to find than you'd think.
Yeah.
I had to search around a couple of different stores to find it. But it starts out being 8%. It used to be 5%, 5.25 if you want to get exact. And then they started making concentrated bleach, and now it's 8.25% if you buy it in the U.S., and it varies country by country. So what happens is over time, that concentration will drop some. So instead of being 8%, you know, if you've had it a couple of years, it might be 6.5%. But it's going to get you close enough that, you know, that's okay.
Okay. No, I didn't know if it converted to salt water over time. I think when you dilute it with water, it turns
Yeah.
into salt.
Well, we make chlorine from salt. It's actually just, you know, yeah, electricity and salt.
Okay, guys, could we do Q&A now with Owen earning his keep?
Okay, right.
One question. Brandy again. How safe would you say the water in the back of the toilet bowl? I mean, not like the toilet bowl itself, but the tank itself. Yeah, not to be gross. But the tank itself, would that need to be treated or?
You know, it's just drinking water in that tank.
Right.
The tanks over time get sort of dirty and all, but, so I would take that, and if you can get it out of the tank, you know, without running it through the toilet. But,
Preferably.
you know, I'd disinfect it with chlorine, just like I was talking about, and it would be another source of water in an emergency.
Sure.
Yeah.
What? Oh, yes. Anders Cass. I know batteries can be a considerable issue as well, but have you considered UV as a method of filtration?
UV is a method of disinfection.
Yes.
Yes, UV disinfection is great. We could talk about that. I'm sort of jumping ahead. Well, we've got a couple products up here that use UV. This is called a solar bag. It's made by a company that started up in Portland. And if you're in the developing world, you might have come across what's called SODIS, S-O-D-I-S, solar disinfection. And you can actually get water treatment just using empty 2-liter plastic bottles, putting them in the sun, and the combination of a small amount of UVC light and the heat provides pretty good disinfection. This is kind of like that same process on steroids. Well, it is with a catalyst, and it speeds up the process and also gets some chemical contamination removal. So this is a UV product. There happens to be one other UV product up here that you'd have a hard time finding in a store because there's one of them. It's actually a product I've worked on, and it's powered by a hand crank and powers a UV bulb, disinfection UVC bulb on the inside of this container that would for disinfecting drinking water. So we lived for a year in Africa, and this is how we much of the water we drank we treated with this, and it works. So if you're here and you've got an extra $500,000 and you like to invest in a product and make something, you could see me afterward.
My name's Janet, and I lived through 2 Los Angeles earthquakes, and the first one was in the 70s, and the city coordinated with the fire department to bring tanker trucks of water to the neighborhoods. I don't think you're probably in charge of that. I don't know if that is even Tom Hubbard's responsibility, but it seems like somebody within the city ought to know that low-tech kind of delivery system.
Bob, and how important is it to, if you're using a filter, to cover viruses?
Well, in a pinch, I'd take my chances, and the point he's getting at is that the viruses are the smallest organism. So if you get a backpacking filter, unless it's got a disinfectant built into it, like silver or something like that, generally speaking, they're going to say that they're effective for protozoa, which is the Giardia cryptosporidium, and for bacteria, but it's awfully hard to get a filter that's small enough to take out viruses. And generally, in water treatment, we look at filtration as getting down to bacteria, and then we're looking at disinfection to take care of viruses. Did I do that again? Sorry. Is that on? Is that on?
Have to hold it down. Oh, did the battery die? Hold the button for about 4 seconds.
Here, we'll just hand off.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. In a pinch, so in an emergency, I'd say you take your chances. But viruses also, maybe I better try to viruses do survive longer than bacteria in the natural environment. So they're probably not as prevalent, but they would be a concern. But if you've got a filter and you've got your bleach and you've got your eyedropper, you're set, right? You got a backpacking filter, it'll take out bacteria. Then do the last step and do the disinfection with chlorine. And just in case anyone's forgotten, what's the rule again on that?
1 drop, 1 gallon, 1 hour.
Good.
This says 40 drops per gallon.
Yeah. If you look closely at his table, so he's got different concentrations of sodium hypochlorite in that center column. And remember this chlorine solution that you buy in the store is about 8%. So you're down a couple levels on that in that table. And I think if you look there, it shows that 1 drop over here for 1 gallon could be appropriate. It might be a little bit on the low end. Now, the really nice thing about chlorine is that it's self-limiting. You're not going to poison yourself with chlorine by putting in too much because you're not going to drink the water. If you put in too much, you'll stop drinking the water before you get to a level that's harmful. So, if you think, oops, I put in way too much, let it sit for an hour and try it, and if you can't drink it, you did put in too much. If you can drink it, don't worry about it. Now, you know, if you were a little uncertain and you put in 2 drops, that's fine. That's not going to be too much.
I've got a question, Paul. Oh, James. What about for neighborhood? Could you talk a little about the types of water filters that are purchasable that would serve more than simply one household? Paul, at some point, could we go into that? Because I think we have an emphasis in Corvallis on developing neighborhood resilience too.
Yeah. Well, I guess you go from what Tom talked about, that cities more and more are looking at having mobile treatment units that they could locate in different parts of the city. And you go from that to something that's more on a neighborhood scale and then down to a household scale. And to be honest, I'm more familiar with the kind of units that the city might buy or for the household. The in-between, when you're talking about a neighborhood, you mentioned a unit that you saw down at Peak Sports. And I looked at it, and the problem with a lot of treatment units, if you look up the information that they have online, is they don't really tell you what the treatment process is. So if you're a treatment engineer, like me or like Todd over here, who's also from CH2M, I can't really tell what it's doing. And that's why I think that the certification is so important. What you really want to look for is a product that's been tested under some rigor, and they've shown that it does in fact work.
Paul, would it make sense for folks to go to the website for Life Straw Community, which is the best performing one in round 1,
Yeah.
and which puts out sufficient volume that if you have people in a major disaster who are out of work, they'd have time to work it to produce enough gallonage for at least quite
Yeah,
10
that-
households or something?
That's a good option, yeah. So he was talking about the Life Straw, and you might have seen this. They promoted this in the developing world, and the idea is that it is actually a straw. You're sucking the water up, and you might have seen pictures. You know, you might be on a plane sometime, and they're showing it in their brochure, and you've got some child leaning over a pond and getting a drink of water by sucking it up through a life straw. It's pretty neat. Obviously, it's not really the way that people want to get their drinking water day after day. So in that sense, it hasn't caught on in the developing world. Just like you wouldn't want to do it, really nobody anywhere wants to do it that way. But for emergencies, it's pretty cool. So this is the Life Straw individual unit. James has a larger one back here. And those, in fact, have gone through the WHO certification program and have been shown to be quite effective.
Hi, Susanna here. What about using essential oils as a backup if bleach is not available, like the antibacterial or antiviral ones, such
Boy.
as thieves' oil?
Yeah, you're pushing what I know on that one. I did one time look at an evaluation of using citrus to disinfect water, like limes, lemons, oranges. What they found was you needed quite significant concentration of citrus to do much good. Like, I'm thinking, this was a while ago since I looked at this, but 2 or 3%, which is pretty high. We're talking, with chlorine, we're down in the parts per million, so we're talking a very small amount. Citrus was more in the, 2 or 3% kind of range. With an essential oil, I would think if it's going to do anything, it's got to be in that kind of level too. Might be pretty flavorful water, but I don't really know.
Wouldn't it need alcohol to break that lipid water barrier between oil and water? I think
I'm not sure. Yeah, you're stumping me on this one.
Over here, Paul.
My name's Lara. What about heavy metals? So, for example, down in Shasta, I know that the water that comes through the lava tubes can have a lot of heavy metals in it. So I was just wondering about that around here and what to do about that.
Yeah, in terms of naturally occurring heavy metals, we really don't have an issue in this area. Now, if there was a disaster and you had some industrial contamination upstream, I think there could be an opportunity that you'd see some of that. Again, I think we'd be focused on dealing with the acute health effects, and heavy metals would tend to be more of a long-term health concern. So I think we would just try to focus on getting pathogen-free water and trying to select the best sources we could. But I don't. Now, the solar bag from this company, I'd have to look back at their data, but they did get some removals of chemical contaminants and heavy metals. I don't remember what levels, but that could be an option.
Hi, my question is about the Berkey water filter. Several people I know who I deeply trust got them, but online I just can't find information about why they say you can go 2 or 3 years without changing the filter. So how the heck do you find out how that kind of product might be working?
I've run into that exact same thing. I don't know about that particular filter. I've just a little familiar with it, but I don't know details. But that's been a frustration for me. So I look up products. People say, does this product work or not? And often you can't find specific information to know for sure that it does. And that's why I keep going back to this certification. That you want products that have either been certified by NSF, are going through this WHO testing and are certified, or at a minimum, on their website, they provide information that a third party has done testing, and they provide some test results that show that it works.
No, they don't. Oh, sorry, should I pass this?
First name is Walter. On the subject of whether or not it works, could you talk about how can you figure out how long it works? Because it seems to me that the filtration elements are subject to contamination, and how do you know when it's plugged up or when it's fostering, become a little bacteria farm?
Yeah. Well, a couple things there. One is that what you just said tends to happen. Filters, it's not so much that they fail and they quit filtering effectively, it's more that they plug. So if you're using a filter and it plugs, there you go. But again, if you combine filtration with disinfection, that's a great combination. So if you do, I think what you're alluding to is sometimes you can actually get concentration of microorganisms in a filter, like a carbon filter at a household faucet. It's not. There's very little evidence that shows that ever causes disease, but you can get releases of larger numbers of organisms periodically from a filter. But if you combine filtration with disinfection, then you're in good shape.
Question, Paul. Paul and I'll share this one. I believe that, as Paul said, there are these evaluations by the WHO. Round 1 was completed, a year and a half ago. Round 2, you said, Paul, there are going to be like twice as many filtration products that they will tell us how they tested out, the WHO, and that'll be issued approximately when do you expect round 2 results?
I thought it'd be by now. Yeah. I think any day or any month or soon.
And that LifeStraw community one, which, as you see on here, tested the best of all, that could be used, as I said, for a community, for a neighborhood, small neighborhood group anyway, of 30 people or so. And it would cost about $10 or $11 or $12 per person to buy one of those if you had 30 people going in on it. And guess what? The city of I used to live in Albuquerque. The city of Corvallis may do its neighborhood empowerment grants again. They take $5,000 a year. You can apply for a grant. And what if a neighborhood got together and said, let's buy something and a replacement filter for that? So just as a backup, the total cost might be a little over $500. Well, why not apply? What have you got to lose? So something to think about. And that's why we're stressing neighborhoods, and the city is interested in neighborhoods. And I even heard from a city council person that the city council is considering debating, it's not for sure yet, but if you want to form a neighborhood association and use city meeting room space, they may not charge you for it for that purpose, which is a real pleasant change for especially neighborhoods that are not real flush.
Well, my question, is this working? Okay. Tracy Ullman is supposed to be here,
No.
and she's not?
No, she wasn't going to be here tonight.
Oh. Well, anyway, I glued all these boards together. This helps you organize yourself.
And Tracy Ullman is the person in the city to contact if you're interested in organizing your neighborhood. That's part of her job. And her contact information is up here. So if you're interested in doing that, she's the name to know.
Out of questions. Whoop.
I'm Janet, and I was talking to John Paul at the break about that a survey he took is sort of misleading, because those of us that are here are people that are interested in this and concerned about it. The people that aren't here are the ones I'm concerned about. None of my neighbors are here. Most of my friends are not here, and they expect somebody else to take care of them. I've had 2 neighborhood gatherings, one in my home and one in a community room, and poorly attended, I would say, still, but better than nothing. But I don't think, I'm curious, if I would like to see another survey, maybe John could do, or James could do that, of who has a neighborhood association that's working on this? How many of us do? Well, that's reassuring. I'll come to your house.
Let me ask those that just raised their hands, if you do the feedback form, could you indicate what neighborhood that is? That would be very, very helpful information for the city and for all of us, I think. Not that we're going to come loot your neighborhood or anything, but you know, it would be good. I think the city would love to hear that feedback.
Burned them out.
I got another question. Always more questions. Suze again. So can you just generally say the difference between what a solid block carbon filter does versus granulated?
Yes, a solid block carbon filter has some sediment removal capability. It is in a solid block, and it has some sediment removal capability. It's usually not used for that. Typically, it would be a sediment filter ahead of it, followed by a carbon block filter. But carbon's effective for absorbing organics in particular. So that's why I use it for taste and odor on a kitchen faucet.
Why don't you tell them what organics are?
Well, organics are dissolved matter that would be naturally occurring in the water, like as leaves decay and break down, organic matter from the soil.
The organics are talking like petroleum products, carbon takes those up, so you have volatile organic carbons, your carbon filter will take those.
Yeah. So
Could you repeat repeat that for us, Paul?
He was asking maybe a little bit more specifically about carbon-based contaminants. And in drinking water, we get concerned with disinfection byproducts, for example, trihalomethane, some different classes of chemicals, and activated carbon or carbon block filters have some removal effectiveness for those. In fact, the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant has carbon they use on top of the filters to help remove some of the naturally occurring organics.
I'm John again. For those of us that are thinking our backup plan is that we can pump out of the streams, all of this presupposes that the streams have water that's reasonably not uncompromised, shall we say. Is that with all the earthquake or hurricanes and so on, or these places, I don't know anything about it, but is that a reasonable assumption for Corvallis? I mean, it's an impossible question,
Yeah.
probably, but.
Thank you for saying it's impossible. What I would picture is that we'd have all these banks of the rivers, like the Marys, collapsing. We'd see major sediment slides into the river, so that water would be really brown for a while. I don't know if that means a few weeks or how long. And then it would slowly heal up over time, I think is what we'd see. Now, does that mean you couldn't treat it to make it safe? I don't think it does. It might mean that the filters are going to clog up much more quickly than what we'd like them to, but I think it'd be treatable. I think that's what we'd be dealing with, is mainly just lots of soil going into the water.
This is Scott. My name's Scott Burris. So on that point, I have a couple of thoughts. So for one thing, Dixon Creek, Oak Creek, I'd highly recommend over like the Willamette River or the Marys River. And you want to go further up is better. So, up the hill, up towards the spring where it comes out of the ground is going to be your best bet. But we want to keep the water clean. And what that means is, like, if our toilets are not working at all, we're going to want to dig latrines, right? We're going to want to dig holes, and you got ash from your campfire that you want to cover up after you do your business. But you want to make sure that you don't dig your latrine too close to the creek. Okay, so we want to go like 200 feet from the creek. We want to keep the creeks clean. If there's oil spills or whatever, that's a whole other story. But the sediment that gets stirred up right after an earthquake, that's just dirt and stuff. That's not a problem. But keeping the water clean in terms of how we go to the bathroom, that's important.
Scott, I'm so glad you brought that up. You'll notice in the survey, one of the topics that could be checked is sanitation and wastewater for a future meeting like this. And Bill Eminger is the manager of environmental health for Benton County. He is considering putting together a team of panelists to deal with that very topic. Thank you. Please mark that if you guys are interested. Oh, and for getting sediment out, bandanas, coffee filters, all kinds of things before you put it into the water you're going to then treat through a filter. And some filters have back flushing capabilities, so you get the crud out and the filter has a longer life. And you can check out what the boxes say on those products in the stores. And remember what Paul said, have they been independently tested? That's the question, right, Paul?
Paul, I have a question. Is there a downside to using a flocculant before you filter your water to remove the sediment?
No, that's a great approach. And there are purification tablets that are used in the developing world that include a flocculant and a disinfectant. And that's been shown to be quite effective.
Right, and in that case, you wouldn't even need to filter it because you'd have the disinfectant and the flocculant
Yeah,
there.
so you'd stir it around.
But you could
It
just
would
use,
settle out a lot of the sediment, and then the
Right.
disinfectant is more effective.
you can still use alum though, can't you?
Yeah. Mhm.
Again, with the concern about viruses, I would not be concerned about viruses if you're looking at getting the water out of Dixon Creek or Oak Creek. But the Giardia, the protozoa is a concern. If you're down to 1 micron filtration, you're probably safe with that. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were microbiologists that could fairly easily look at the water. You know, I mean, get a microscope and check it out. I'm not a microbiologist, just a biologist. So I don't know how feasible that is, but setting up a lab, I think, would be fairly simple. No?
Well, there are actually portable bacteriological tests that we use in the developing world if we want to check water. It's the when you're new on the trip, you get the privilege of sleeping with the samples of water, keep them warm at night, and those work pretty well. But you know, it's probably not the kind of thing that the average person is going to want to be doing their bacteriological testing of the water.
But a neighborhood level, you might.
You could. You'd probably want to have some knowledge of what's going on, but you could. It could be at a neighborhood level. But we really want to rely on effective treatment, and then use that for confirmation. But you know, when you think about testing, you're not going to test every drop you drink anyway, right? You're just taking small samples and testing it. So we don't want to become over-reliant on testing. We want to use the right treatment.
It might be a good gauge whether you use 1 drop or 40 drops.
Sure, and
right,
and
Clorox.
now, just because I'm into this too, I mean, this is not something that would be too difficult for a neighborhood to do as well. But I have a chlorine test kit, so it's quite inexpensive. It's easy to use. It's actually gives you very good results. It's not what a city's going to use out in their system, but it's actually quite reliable. But you can check the level of chlorine in the drinking water with a unit like this. So, you know, it's maybe at the city level, maybe neighborhood levels, they have units. But again, you probably want to have some training in how to use it. It's probably the only thing I've got that James doesn't have. Otherwise, he's got every other kind of treatment known to man.
Now, which neighborhoods do you guys live in?
Well, I have one more comment about the latrine issue. I saw on a preparation website someone suggesting you use your toilet for your latrine and put a bag in it as a liner, so that way you aren't having to dig a latrine near water if you're still able to be in your house. And then you just, you know, close the bag when you're done. Seemed like a good idea.
By the way, too, if you saw my bucket, this is our earthquake kit. So it's got a hole in it, which is not the greatest thing for water. But the point is that what you really like to have are 2 containers. So this is my raw water container, and I would fill it up with water. And I've got a filter unit and a little tank fitting there that it fits into it. And then I'd put my clean water container down below and filter the water through. So these filters, like the Sawyer units, the production rate's pretty low. So you like to set up a little bit of a system where it can drip through slowly and fill the clean water container. But that's all the kind of stuff you want to do ahead of time, right? You don't want to be looking for a drill and putting in the hole in your bucket and all that after the disaster, because you won't have the thing you need to do that. Seems to me that we've gone a long time, and you better do the drawing and let people get the prize.